Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a story that moves slowly, like warm air drifting across an old vineyard at the end of a long day. You're standing there now? Or, well, you feel like you are, toes brushing against uneven soil, leaves rustling above you in that soft hush that only grapevines can make. A thin line of sunset clings to the hills, staining them the color of watered wine. And right here, in this calm stretch of ancient Greece, you're about to wander into those first quiet whispers people once told about Dionysus before the festivals. Before the wild legends, just the early murmurs shared among workers who tended vines late into the evening. Honestly, with the heat, the bugs, and the endless lifting. But the people back then somehow managed it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow breath as you step deeper into the vineyard. The air smells like warm fruit and dust, the kind that sticks lightly on your skin, as though nature itself is giving you a gentle tap on the shoulder. Your fingertips brush a cluster of grapes, small, firm, and just a little sticky, but it's the sound that pulls you in. Low murmurs of workers finishing their shift, voices drifting like threads of smoke. They're talking about something, or rather someone, with that mix of amusement and reverence that tells you the story has been repeated often enough to feel familiar, yet mysterious enough to stay exciting. You'll catch a phrase, the wanderer with soft steps, and another voice adds, the one who sweetens things. The names don't fully make sense yet, but the tone does. You know that kind of whisper? It's the same kind people today might use when talking about a celebrity sighting or someone from the office who mysteriously never joins. Zoom calls with the camera on, a little teasing, a little as you wander closer. You hear an old farmer explaining that Dionysus wasn't just the god of wine. He was the quiet guardian of vines themselves. The early version of him, he says, wasn't the wild, ecstatic figure you might think of. He was more gentle, a nighttime companion, someone who drifted among vineyards when the workers slept, ensuring the grapes stayed safe, plump, and destined to become something richer. You imagine him moving like a warm breeze, which is probably more peaceful than imagining the wild festival version who absolutely would have broken your Wi-Fi router for fun. One of the workers laughs softly while tying up a loose vine, telling a story he heard from his grandmother about how Dionysus supposedly once saved a vineyard from an unusually cold night by humming through the rows. His voice, so the tale ghosts, kept the grapes warm. This would definitely have made modern weather forecasts more interesting. Tonight, a god hums, and temperatures stay moderate. But then, the tone shifts. A woman stacking baskets adds that these grapevines weren't just crops. They were cherished companions. Whole families tended them, celebrated them, protected them, and because wine was more than a drink, sometimes safer than water, sometimes sacred, they believed every good harvest happened because someone, or some being, was looking out for them. Different villages had different names, but one whispered figure kept returning, Dionysus. You take a few more steps and feel a new texture beneath your sandals. Crushed leaves, warm and papery. The scent rises like a memory someone else had before you, and with it comes a sense that something is shifting around you, as if history is loosening up its shoulders and letting you peek in. You hear another small detail. In early Greece, vineyard workers believed that if grapevines rustled at night without a breeze, it meant Dionysus was walking through, checking on his plants. The funnier thing is that the same belief said if the vines rustled too loudly, he was annoyed, and honestly, that sounds exactly like the kind of passive-aggressive communication style most of us use when we're upset but pretending we're not. Even gods, it seems, understood dramatic rustling. A younger worker points out something even stranger, one of those facts hardly anyone outside the region knew. He says some believe Dionysus could influence the taste of the grapes just by brushing his hands over the leaves, like a divine flavor upgrade. Imagine touching your pantry, and suddenly your instant noodles turn gourmet. A dream. You crouch beside a vine and run your hand along the stem. It's firm, warm, and humming with the faint life of evening. There's a softness to the air that makes the whole world feel slightly slower, slightly safer. You hear another whisper. Someone mentions how the earliest stories about Dionysus weren't about partying or chaos. They were tales of protection, guidance, and finding sweetness where bitterness once grew. A quiet sweetness, not the kind that slaps you in the face like modern energy drinks pretending to be fruit. You straighten up, brushing dirt off your hands, and keep walking. The vineyard stretches endlessly, rolling under the last bit of evening light. You notice the workers are leaving now, their silhouettes shrinking against the horizon. One of them gives you a small nod, as if he sees that your steps match the rhythm of someone who wants to listen, not just watch. And as the final voices fade into the twilight, the air settles again. A stillness forms, not empty, but expectant. You feel it in the back of your neck, that sensation you get right before someone whispers a secret near your ear. You pause, because somewhere between the vines, in the very center of this warm, ancient evening, a presence stirs. Not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle shift like a footstep. placed on soft earth, and you realize the whispers weren't just rumors, they were invitations. You keep walking through the vineyard, the soft evening air still clinging to your skin, when a shift flickers at the edge of your vision like heat bending the light, or like someone exhaling behind you without making a sound. You pause, half expecting it to be just your imagination. But then the vines ahead of you rustle in that strangely intentional way you heard the workers whisper about, and a figure steps out from between the rows. Not dramatically, not with thunder or mystical sparkles, more like someone arriving, late to a picnic and trying not to make it awkward. He looks young, but also older than any age you can name, with hair the color of overripe grapes and eyes carrying a soft, restless shimmer. He moves like he's balancing on the thin line between daydream and mischief, and before you can even figure out what to say, he's already watching you with a curious tilt of his head, the corners of his mouth curling like he's privately amused by something he hasn't yet decided to share. This, you realize, is Dionysus, not the wild frenzied figure most people imagine, but the earlier quieter version from the old murmurs, still forming, still wandering, still figuring out who he is supposed to be. And right now, he looks bothered, mildly frustrated, like someone who just discovered that his favorite snack tastes bland today for no reason at all. He steps closer, the dust soft under his feet, and the warm breeze seems to follow him cautiously, as if unsure whether to make a grand entrance or not. You can smell something faintly sweet in the air around him, like diluted nectar mixed with sun-warmed flowers. Not overwhelming, more like a memory of sweetness rather than the taste itself. You're about to greet him when he speaks first, voice unexpectedly gentle. "Do you know," he murmurs, "that honey used to be sweeter?" You blink, that is, not the legendary opening line you expected from a god. But he looks genuinely troubled, drawing a loose vine through his fingers as though asking it for advice. "These bees," he sighs softly, "they're doing their best. They really are. But something's changed. They've forgotten how to find the deepest flowers. The right flowers." He glances over his shoulder, as if the bees might be listening, and the honey is suffering for it. You stare for a moment, letting that settle. You hadn't expected this to be his concernsome cosmic flavor crisis. But he seems deeply invested, and you find yourself nodding, even though you don't know nearly enough about ancient bee diets to be helpful. He paces a little, bare feet brushing fallen petals, looking like a student trying to solve a math problem without the formula. He pauses, then looks back at you with a spark of indignation. "Humans say I'm the god of wine, but what's wine without sweetness? What's celebration without softness?" He gestures vaguely at the vineyard. "Everything is connected, or at least it should be." Then, leaning in a bit closer, he adds with breezy exasperation, "Honestly, if you tasted the last batch these poor beekeepers made, Bunchik Kang Sanyi, how?" The words float lightly, almost teasing, and you can't help the small laugh that escapes you. His expression brightens at that, pleased to have found an audience. "See," he says, "you understand?" You follow as he wanders deeper into the vines. His presence shifts the world around him. Colors look just a little more saturated, the shadows feel a little softer, and sounds seem stretched out, like they're being filtered through warm fabric. Though you know vineyards can be exhausting places to work, right now the air feels almost hypnotically gentle. He glances back occasionally, ensuring you're close behind, like a teacher making sure the slowest student doesn't wander off out as you walk. He talks not in grand proclamations, but in thoughtful rambles. He complains lightly about how the bees in this region used to produce honey with a depth of flavor everyone adored, but now, he waves dramatically, it tastes like someone whispered sweetness into a jar and hoped it would stick. His dramatics are soft, never sharp, almost theatrical in a sleep-ready kind of way. He crouches near a clump of wildflowers, brushing his fingertips over the petals. "Even these aren't what they used to be," he mutters. "Humans don't notice, but I do." He plucks one bloom gently, holding it up to your nose. The scent is delicate but thin pleasant, but lacking that deeper layer you can almost imagine used to be there. "Too mild," he says. "Everything's too mild." Then he suddenly straightens, eyes brightening with the glint of an idea forming. "But perhaps," he murmurs, tapping his chin, "perhaps they can be taught again. Bees aren't hopeless. They're brilliant, actually, but they need guidance, encouragement." He grins, a flicker of mischief crossing his features, maybe even a little persuasion. He begins pacing again, hands clasped behind his back like a philosopher considering the universe or a chef designing a dessert menu. "The ancient beekeepers try, of course," he muses. "They watch, they tend, they stress. Always stressing," he chuckles. "Humans worry more than the bees do. That has always amused me." As he moves, the vineyard seems to react, leaves turning slightly as if tracking his steps. You have the faint sense that nature listens to him the way tired students listen to a favorite storyteller, half dreaming, half devoted. "Do you hear that?" he asks suddenly. You pause, straining your ears. At first it sounds like nothing more than the usual buzz of evening insects, but slowly, you notice a specific quality and consistent hum. Uneven like a choir where half the singers are Dionysus sighs at it, shaking his head. "That is the sound of bees who've forgotten their purpose," he says gently. Confused? Distracted? Then, softer, and I can't blame them. The world keeps changing faster than they can learn. You step beside him, listening. The hum rises and dips like a wavering lullaby, not unpleasant but missing a certain richness. He gazes toward the sound with the expression of someone watching a toddler draw on a wall, not angry, just resigned. Some say change is natural, he murmurs. Some insist nothing can be done. He pauses, then gives you a sideways look. Kuk spga vien contran luan va viak, ta ting kintheep niu hun da now. His smile turns sly, but historians weren't here, were they? He steps forward again, and you follow. The vineyard opens into a broader clearing where the last streaks of dusk cling stubbornly to the sky. Here, the air feels heavier with sweetness, as if memories of better honey linger in the soil. Dionysus stretches out his hand, palm up, feeling the wind like a musician testing the tuning of an instrument. I'll have to try something new, he says at last, tone brightening with determination. Something gentle, something clever, something. He pauses for effect. A little bit fun. He turns to you fully, the mischief in his eyes sharpening even as his voice stays calm and soothing. I think, he says slowly, I'm going to teach them. The night deepens around you, warm and expectant, as though the vineyard itself is leaning in to listen. And you, he adds softly, should come along. Witness it. After all, how often do you get invited to a lesson taught by a god who refuses to accept bland honey? And with that, he smiles a small, restless smile and steps into the deepening dusk, expecting you to follow. You move deeper into the warm light of the afternoon, still feeling the fading shimmer Dionysus left in your thoughts, as if a breeze has been brushing the inside of your mind. The vineyard behind you hums with quiet energy, and as you step toward the next stretch of land, you hear it, this gentle, persistent buzzing, like a soft chorus vibrating against the sun-soaked air. It wraps around your ears with that soothing consistency that could almost be white noise, the kind you'd sleep to if you didn't know it came from thousands of tiny creatures flitting through the blossoms like living sparks. You pause, letting your shoulders drop, letting the warmth soak into you. The sound is strangely grounding. Maybe this is why the ancient Greeks believed bees carried messages from the natural world. Though to be fair, you've also seen people on the internet claim that their cat meowing at 3 a.m. is a sign. So humanity hasn't changed that much. The difference here is that these bees feel purposeful. They drift around you in calm spirals. As if reading the air the way a traveler reads the surface of the sea, you take a slow step forward, and the earth beneath you feels a bit softer, a bit sweeter somehow. The flowers around you quiver with wings passing over them, and in the middle of it all, you notice how the ancient Greeks once described bees as tiny envoys, creatures that bridged the mundane world and the realm of gods. There's a faint poetry hovering in their movement, too graceful to be chaotic, but too organic to be organized. You catch yourself smiling because for a second they remind you of commuters and a subway station. If commuters were fluffy, golden, polite, and actually knew where they were going, as you walk, you brush your fingertips lightly across low shrubs, and you smell something subtle and warm, wild thyme, maybe with a hint of pine. The breeze collects the scent with the humming of the bees and turns everything into something soft. This was the environment Greek beekeepers worked in, long before metal smokers or tidy wooden frames. You picture them in simple tunics, squinting into the sunlight, trying not to get stung, trying to interpret the behavior of insects with a seriousness you'd reserve for deciphering your yearly tax documents. Yet the Greeks really did believe bees had insight. There are stories of priestesses who imitated their motions, of poets who claimed the muses sent inspiration in the form of honey. And as you continue down the uneven path, your sandals brushing dust upward in tiny clouds, you catch something shimmering among the bees, not divine, but definitely intriguing. A small cluster of them seems to circle faster, their little bodies forming a trembling sphere above a patch of pale purple flowers. You move closer, curious. When you bend down, the smell deepens, something sweet with a grassy edge. These flowers don't look unusual at first, but the bees are reacting like they've discovered ancient secrets or free Wi-Fi. Their wings beat the air in quick, excited pulses as they dip repeatedly into the petals. You tilt your head, sensing something about this plant is different. Maybe it's just richer nectar. Maybe it's something else. A thought passes through your mind. Dionysus had said something about messages from nature, and while you know he's dramatic by default, the timing feels suspicious. The bee's behavior is almost ceremonial, and you crouch even lower because something inside you wants to see what they see. You smell it again, a sweetness that doesn't come from modern processed honey. It's deeper, heavier, with a faint herbal edge, like if someone mixed warm sugar with forest air. As you observe, you notice how the bees move differently depending on the flower. Some blossoms barely catch their attention. Others draw long, lingering visits. You follow them with your eyes and realize you're learning something the ancient Greeks believed. Bees can vote with their wings. Their dance's tiny coded wiggles were said to reveal pathways nature wanted humans to follow. Most people now call it communication signaling, but the Greeks saw it as prophecy in miniature. You straighten slowly, knees popping just slightly, and whisper under your breath because the moment feels too delicate for normal volume. Above you, bees drift in patient ellipses, the sound rising and falling like breath. There's something hypnotic about it, a sense that your mind is syncing with the rhythm of the hive. You're half tempted to lie down in the grass and listen from there. But then you remember the very real possibility of becoming a human landing pad. It would ruin the aesthetic instantly. The air thickens gently, with late afternoon warmth as you walk further along the ridge. And the bees accompany you like a soft, floating escort. Their wings flicker gold in the light. And you realize the ancient Greeks weren't exaggerating when they wrote about bees guiding travelers. The insects drift ahead of you at times, gathering in little clusters as if pointing you toward something somewhere. You let your steps follow the pattern. The path curves, leading you to a slightly shaded area where slender, pale trunks rise out of the earth. There, nestled between the trees, you see a natural clearing filled with plants you don't recognize. The bees know them, though they dive with purpose, zigzagging quickly from one blossom to another, occasionally bumping into each other like flustered siblings. You exhale softly. Something about this spot feels like a turning page. Then you notice something stranger. Some bees aren't collecting nectar, they're hovering in front of plants, repeatedly returning to the same specific flowers as if reading them. The ancient Greeks believed bees carried whispers from gods because they seemed to communicate with plants in a way humans couldn't understand. This right now feels like that. A moment of quiet translation between species. You hear your steps crunch lightly over dry leaves, and the bees shift as if acknowledging your presence, though you can't be sure. Their collective hum grows louder, fuller. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a small historical detail. Some Greek myths described bees as originally being nymphs transformed by divine will. You try to picture that transformation, but your brain produces an image of sparkly wings and glitter, like a low-budget fantasy movie. You chuckle under your breath. It's probably not what they meant. Still, you're drawn in. You watch as they circle, and you feel a sense of being guided and unforced. Not summoned, just invited. One bee lands on your sleeve light as dust. It rests there for a heartbeat. You stay perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell. Its tiny legs shift once, twice, and then it lifts off again, disappearing back into the shimmer of wings. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. You think, are these the messengers Dionysus hinted at? You think, is this how he plans to fix the boring honey problem he complained about? And another thought follows. Historians still debate whether the ancient Greeks interpreted bee behavior accurately, or if they simply liked the idea of nature whispering secrets. You stand there, letting the soft hum settle into your bones. It's pleasant, almost meditative, and as the bees swirl in a slow, widening spiral, you sense something shifting in the air, something that hints Dionysus is not done, and neither are these bees. Tonight, they're carrying messages again, and you're finally beginning to understand their language. You drift forward, still carrying the faint sweetness from the last moment when Dionysus vanished between the vines, leaving you with the buzzing trail of those ancient bees. You step toward the low wooden fences of the beekeeping fields, the ground warm beneath your feet, the air trembling with sunlight that feels like it's been simmering there since dawn. There's a hum, everywhere soft rising, almost Cheyenne as Ban La BGC vow, Trion. You sense how the rhythms of this place pulse differently, like you've walked into a quiet argument whispered in insect language. You hear voices first, not the bees, though they do make their own sort of gossip, circling in spirals like tiny airborne philosophers, but the beekeepers. Their complaints drift through the air with the sluggish weight of midsummer heat. They mutter about a strange season, a honey flow that stops and starts like an indecisive storyteller, and flowers that bloom too early or not at all. The oldest keeper waves a thin reed basket in frustration, grumbling that he hasn't seen a season this odd since he was young enough to outrun a goat. You smile a little, because even here, thousands of years ago, people apparently loved telling you how things used to be better. You take another step, and that soft dirt shifts under your sandal. There's a sweetness hanging in the air, but not the right kind. It's faintly sour, a little musky, like a jar of honey someone accidentally left open during a family reunion. You catch yourself chuckling at the memory of Dionysus complaining about bland honey. If he smelled this, you whisper to yourself, he'd start a full divine intervention. One of the beekeepers turns to look at you, squints as if trying to decide whether you're real or just heat shimmer, then shrugs and goes back to arguing with a younger man about flower cycles. You wander closer to one of the hives. The bees here behave differently than the last group you followed, with Dionysus's move in jittery circles, confused patterns, almost like they've forgotten their choreography. A young beekeeper sighs, rubbing his forehead with honey-sticky fingers. They don't know where to go anymore, he says, not even noticing he's talking to you like you've worked here your whole life. They come back with barely any nectar, or too much, or nectar that tastes wrong. He throws his hands up, accidentally flicking a droplet at your elbow. It glistens there like a tiny golden star. You lift your arm and sniff it. There's something unusual in the scent, light, but sharp, like citrus someone tried to reinvent. It reminds you slightly of modern artisanal honey that costs more than your week's groceries. and you smirk at the absurdity of comparing ancient Greece to a boutique food market. Guess inflation is eternal, you mutter. Nobody hears you. Thankfully. Esban BGC, Giacuk, Leonish, you notice clay tablets propped up on wooden tables, half covered in wax flakes. Some have scribbles, early notes, sketches of foraging routes, little marks showing flower patches. The symbols are rough but unmistakably deliberate. These people weren't just keeping bees. They were studying them like tiny winged professors. One tablet even shows a crude drawing of a flower with an exaggerated nectar droplet, possibly the ancient equivalent of, "We need to talk about this plant." You brush your fingers over the markings, feeling the grooves like small whispers trapped in clay. Near the edge of the fields, an older woman in a faded blue himadian kneels beside a stump, gently slicing open a honeycomb with a thin bronze blade. She gestures to you. "Look," she says, her voice calm but heavy, like she's seen too many puzzling seasons. Inside the comb, the honey glows still golden, still sunlit, but something about its texture seems off. A bit more fluid, a little less viscous. "It shouldn't do this," she murmurs. Some say a new flower is confusing them. Some say the gods are giving hints. She looks at you out of the corner of her eye. "So me blame Dionysus." She pauses. "But he wouldn't bother with bees, would he?" You press your lips together to hold in a laugh. If only she knew the god had practically hosted a pop-up workshop for bees just yesterday. Hard to say. You manage. He's unpredictable. She nods, grunting softly, as though nothing about divine unpredictability surprises her anymore. The afternoon light warms your shoulders, and you breathe in a mix of crushed herbs, dusty wood, and honeyed air. The bees swoop close to you, not aggressively, more like curious librarians checking whether you've returned a book late. One lands briefly on your wrist, its tiny feet tapping like it's typing out a micro-message. You imagine it saying something dramatic like, "Help us, human," and grin. Shaking your head, the beekeepers continue their debate, some blaming the weather, others the soil, a few insisting the gods are sending messages through the bees' odd dances. Kuk spgavn kan, tran luan va viek, liuji hi lpc, ko thuk ss tin mgi thaji, cayan ong la dsu, hayu thine than hei kang? You recall from something you once overheard, but looking at these people now, it's easy to believe they really did. You wander deeper, reaching a shaded area beneath olive trees. Their silver leaves flicker like tiny mirrors. Someone has been storing records here. Red baskets filled with wax scraps. Pots of pollen sorted by color. Scroll fragments detailing flowering cycles. You kneel to inspect a strip of parchment, noticing a line describing a season when honey suddenly tasted like wild thyme for weeks despite no thyme blooming nearby. A small footnote unusual for the time claims the phenomenon remains unexplained. You chuckle softly. Even ancient scientists loved adding "needs more research" when they didn't know the answer. Farther ahead, you see something stranger. A cluster of wooden frames hung from branches like peculiar ornaments. Bees land on them, explore them, then wander off again. A bearded man waves you over. "Experiments," he says proudly. "Trying new shapes? Maybe they'll like these better." You nod thoughtfully, even though you're aware bees don't usually choose architecture based on aesthetic preference. But who knows? Greek bees might have been pickier. You step back as the air grows still for a moment. The hum quiets not fully, just enough for you to notice the absence. Then it rises again, almost synchronized, as though the entire apiary has agreed on a temporary truce. The beekeepers fall silent too. It's peaceful, almost sacred. You sense something shifting under the surface, like the world is taking a slow breath. You realize Dionysus's influence has already begun to ripple through this place, subtle, unspoken, but present. The bees feel it, the keepers sense it, and you, standing among the hives, catching glimmers of strange honey and stranger behavior, can almost hear the beginning of a larger story, threading itself into the fields. A jar cracks faintly behind you as someone mishandles it. Honey spills like sunshine made liquid. A boy sighs and mutters, "Another wasted day." But you don't think it's wasted. Not at all. You can feel something forming a shift. A secret. A sweetness rearranging itself in the world. And as you stand in the center of that warm, buzzing chaos, you understand that every small complaint, every odd season, every confused dance is pointing towards something new. Something you're meant to follow. You keep walking beside Dionysus, the air warm enough that you feel a tiny sheen of sweat on your arms. Like the vineyards themselves are exhaling, the god moves in loose, unhurried steps, as if he's listening to something only he can hear, maybe the rhythm of blossoms, or maybe the gossip of bees that haven't even arrived yet. You can't tell. All you know is that you're following him into a space that feels both ordinary and enchanted. The way a kitchen feels right before someone opens the oven with a tray of something sweet. He stops in the middle of a clearing dotted with early blooming wildflowers. You hear the buzz of a few bees circling lazily, as if still deciding whether this patch of earth is worth visiting. Dionysus lifts his chin toward them and gives you a conspiratorial smile that drips with mischief. The kind you'd expect from someone who once turned pirates into dolphins just to prove a point. You shift your weight, sensing that this is the moment when teaching begins, although to your modern mind, A god teaching bees sounds a bit like someone trying to tutor Wi-Fi signals. You watch him raise one hand, fingers relaxed, curling slightly like vines trying to climb sunlight. The bees hover closer. You see, Dionysus murmurs, though he's speaking to the bees, not you. You follow what feels good. You always have. His voice is soft, almost brushing the ground. Caught to your surprise, several bees dip lower, as if acknowledging him. You blink, wondering whether this is really happening, or whether you're just inhaling too much warm countryside air. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of thyme, crushed grass, and the faint sugary whisper of flowers you can't quite name. Dionysus turns to you. They only need suggestions, he says, not orders. Never orders. You nod, although you're not entirely sure you understand. You try to imagine giving suggestions to be as gentle reminders like, hey, could you maybe check out that flower over there? No pressure. It sounds ridiculous enough that you almost laugh, but the scene is strangely solemn. The bees weave slow loops, drifting as though the god's presence has softened gravity itself. He takes a step deeper into the clearing, brushing his palm lightly over clusters of pale blossoms. The flowers respond not visibly, but in something like scent. A deeper, fuller aroma blooms around you, the floral equivalent of someone turning up the brightness on a screen. You breathe it in, feeling your chest expand with a quiet calm. Most people, Dionysus says, think sweetness begins in the fruit, or in the hive, but it starts here, in persuasion. He gestures at the air, the flowers, the bees, the shimmering space where they all meet. You listen, leaning into the warmth. There's a gentleness in his voice you weren't expecting. The bees begin to dance slow, deliberate traces in the air. You realize you're witnessing the early form of what future beekeepers would call the waggle dance. That remarkable communication ritual where bees map out the path to nectar like tiny GPS units powered entirely by enthusiasm. Except here, the dance feels different, softer, a little maybe even divine. You step closer, trying not to disturb anything. The grass bends quietly under your feet, and the scent deepens again. You notice that some flowers seem richer in color than they did moments ago. A trick of light, maybe, or maybe something else. After all, you remind yourself, this is the god of transformation. If anyone could make a flower blush just because the mood felt right, it would be him. He kneels beside a clump of tiny purple blossoms, placing his hand at the level of the bees. His fingers make slow circles, not touching them, but guiding. The bees adjust, forming tighter loops. There, he whispers to the air, follow the warmth. Remember the taste. Don't be afraid to linger. You sense a lesson forming, not a lecture, but a rhythm. Dionysus teaches in gestures, in fragrances, in the way his presence shifts the air. It strikes you as both theatrical and deeply natural. Some say, he continues, glancing at you through a lock of sunlit hair, that I taught them to choose flowers, not just for nectar, but for harmony. That I made their wandering a kind of worship. He pauses, lips curling with quiet amusement. But of course, the historians still argue about all that. They always argue. They can barely agree on whether I taught mortals anything at all. You grin despite yourself. It's comforting to know that even divine lessons can get tangled up in academic debates. Centuries later, as he stands again, the bees follow him in a thin, shimmering stream. Their wings catch the light like flecks of gold leaf spinning in the wind. Dionysus steps toward another patch of flowers white taller, gently nodding. He doesn't touch them, but their scent blooms stronger anyway, as if the flowers were waiting for him to simply notice them. You lean closer and realize what's happening. The god is showing the bees how to recognize certain patterns. The rhythm of petals, the weight of sweetness carried in the air, the subtle color changes that signal richer nectar. He is teaching them the way a conductor teaches a choir through timing, through breath, through presence. It dawns on you that this is a historical moment hidden beneath layers of myth. The Greeks truly did believe bees carried messages, blessings, and sometimes even souls. They revered honey not just as food but as something sacred. Watching Dionysus teach, bees suddenly feels less like mythic and more like a poetic explanation for why ancient honey tasted the way it did. Aromatic, touched by ritual, a thought slips into your mind. If modern beekeepers saw this, they'd probably prepare 5 new documentaries and a dozen think pieces. One of them would definitely be titled something like God-Based Beekeeping, a lost technique reconsidered. You stifle a laugh. The god's shoulders rise and fall with a slow breath. They're learning, he murmurs. You're learning too, even if you don't realize it yet. You swallow softly. Maybe you are. There's something soothing in watching a being of myth guide tiny creatures with nothing more than calm intention. Maybe the lesson isn't about honey at all. Maybe it's about influence, harmony, patience. Or maybe you're overthinking things, and this really is just a divine bee workshop. The sun drifts lower, brushing the clearing in a warm honey-colored glow fitting you think. The bees form a final looping pattern around Dionysus before drifting toward a cluster of flowers they hadn't noticed before. The blossoms glow faintly in the evening light, soft and inviting. The god watches them with a fondness that surprises you. Sweeter days are coming, he says, but sweetness always begins in practice. You take a breath, letting the scene settle around you. The air is warm. The scents are rich. The bees hum like a quiet instrument, tuning itself for a festival performance far in the future, and you keep walking beside him, curiosity humming in your chest, wondering where this lesson will lead next, knowing it's only the beginning. You follow Dionysus deeper into the forest, your steps soft on the pine needles as the light shifts from warm afternoon gold into something more filtered, something almost tinted with honey itself. You don't break stride, even when a breeze carrying a flirtatious mix of floral sweetness brushes over your face, like someone gently tapping you on the cheek to remind you that you're still here, still awake, still wandering into whatever peculiar plan a god has for a swarm of very confused bees. You inhale, and the air feels thicker, as if the whole grove hums with a recipe only nature knows well. Nature and Dionysus. Apparently, you move closer, noticing how even the shadows seem to stretch toward him, like guests leaning in at a dinner party. They didn't realize they were invited to. Dionysus turns slightly, giving you that amused half-smile he seems to wear whenever he's up to something, kind of like that friend who says, "Trust me, it'll be fun," right before dragging you into a hobby that accidentally costs you an entire paycheck. He flicks his fingers toward a small clearing ahead, and you can already hear something faint. A buzz, yes, but not chaotic like bees panicking. This is softer, almost rhythmic, like they're practicing for an orchestra and only rehearsing the warm-up scales. You take another step, and the scent grows stranger. It's floral, but layered, like someone mixed wild thyme, crushed petals, and maybe a whisper of early summer sunlight. You glance down and notice the ground. Changing color patches of flowers arranged in patterns that absolutely do not look natural. They spiral outward, forming rings and curves like a floral mosaic. And you're not the only one who notices. A few workers from nearby villages stand at the edge, whispering, unsure whether to stay or flee. Honestly, you relate. If a god came to your local community garden and started rearranging all the plants into a giant cosmic labyrinth, you'd also have questions. One older villager leans toward the others and mutters something about a ritual of sweetness, which sounds like it should be the name of a cookie shop, but instead describes the bizarre event unfolding before you. Dionysus kneels, brushing his hand through a cluster of small pink blossoms. Instantly, their scent releases into the air more intensely than before, as if responding to his touch. The bees react immediately, spiraling down in elegant arcs, gathering around the flowers in a way that looks choreographed. Their movement is almost hypnotic. You watch them circle, land, and lift again, following invisible instructions like they're being guided through a lesson they've somehow been waiting centuries to attend. The villagers whisper that this must be some kind of divine gardening. One of them swears his grandmother saw something like this decades ago and spent the rest of her life claiming that honey grew sweeter when flowers bloomed under moonlight. You try not to laugh, but it feels endearing, like how people today insist their houseplants grow better when they play them classical music. Maybe it's not so different. You notice Dionysus isn't just arranging flowers. He's adjusting them with precision, turning blossoms toward certain directions, pinching stamen gently, even humming softly as though the song itself is part of the ritual. The tune is simple but calming, like something you'd hear in one of those sleep playlists that promise to knock you out in 10 minutes but actually keep you awake wondering why the harp sounds so dramatic. The bees, though they love it, they move in synchronized waves, dipping and weaving through blossoms that seem to pulse with color. You shift closer and catch the faint warmth radiating from the flowers, as if the god's presence charges the petals with a glow. The warmth wraps around your shins like a soft blanket, and you swear you can taste sweetness on the back of your tongue even before any honey touches your lips. It feels unreal, the kind of sensation you'd expect from a very experimental spa treatment. You wonder if someone in the future will try to trademark Dionysian floral therapy. Honestly, it would sell out immediately. One villager beside you comments that people might remember this moment for centuries if the honey truly changes. Another insists it's nonsense, and that bees just have good days and bad days like the rest of us. You smile because the truth is somewhere in between. You can practically feel it. You can sense something shifting, something small but significant. Then again, historians still debate whether rituals like this were literal, symbolic, or simply poetic exaggerations that storytellers embellished after too much wine. Standing here though, it's hard to call any of this an exaggeration. You're watching a god play conductor to the tiniest orchestra in the ancient world. Then comes the strange part, the part no one prepared you for. Dionysus steps back, lifts his arm slightly, and lets the breeze catch the sleeves of his robe. He whispers something, a word you don't recognize. And suddenly the flowers begin to release pollen in shimmering little clouds. But instead of dispersing randomly, the particles swirl upward, forming thin, glowing spirals. The bees respond instantly, diving through the spirals, coating themselves in pollen that looks almost iridescent. The villagers gasp. You feel your breath catch, but not in fear and awe. It's like watching fireworks that don't explode but instead melt gently into the air. The ritual continues, slow and mesmerizing. Dionysus circles the pattern, humming, tapping petals, snapping branches gently like adjusting the strings of an instrument. The bees follow his motion, fluttering in perfect arcs. And you notice something new, tiny droplets forming on the flowers, thick and golden. nectar, but it shines differently. It almost glows faintly, clinging to the blossoms like small beads of sunlight. You lean forward slightly, fascinated. The villagers whisper that nectar like this could create honey sweeter than anything the region has ever known. Some say it might even influence festivals, celebrations, offerings. You tuck that away, wondering what changes might ripple from this single moment. And there's a little detail, the kind that makes you grin. One bee, slightly chubbier than the rest, lands on your hand for a second, almost as if saying hello. You freeze, not wanting to scare it off. It lifts its head like it's inspecting you, judging whether you belong here. After a moment, it buzzes politely and returns to the ritual. You whisper, "Fair enough," under your breath. It feels like a tiny blessing. The ritual lasts longer than you expect, long enough for the forest to dim, long enough for the shadows to stretch and settle. When Dionysus finally lowers his hands, the bees drift away gently, returning to their hives with purposeful calm. The flowers settle, the glow fades, and the forest exhales with you. You feel something has changed, even if you can't name it yet. You turn to the villagers and see the awe on their faces mirrored in yours. Whatever just happened, it wasn't simply strange, it was transformative, and you can't help but wonder where this new sweetness will lead you next. You walk alongside Dionysus as the forest thins, and the dusty path rolls gently into a small hillside clearing where the air carries the faintest sweetness, like someone left fruit in the sun just long enough to warm but not enough to spoil. You feel it the moment you step forward, something soft, something new, like the world has taken a quiet breath. And before you even fully understand what you're sensing, you begin to hear voices drifting up from a distant settlement preparing for a festival. The sound is delicate, drifting on the breeze the same way the bees drifted between flowers earlier, and you find yourself drawn toward it the way a tired traveler drifts toward the smell of warm bread. You follow Dionysus without him needing to say anything. He moves with that familiar mixture of mischief and serenity, like a cat who knows exactly where the cream is hidden, and exactly how long it'll take you to find it. As you walk, he glances over his shoulder, eyes shimmering with that amused glint he always seems to carry whenever his plans are about to unfold in some unpredictable way. You wonder if he's thinking about the strange floral ritual earlier, that moment when the bees had swirled around him as if responding to cues you could barely perceive. And part of you suspects he's still deciding how much of this was intentional and how much was just luck. Even gods, you figure, must wing things sometimes. You reach the first signs of human settlement. Woven baskets leaning against a low stone wall, grapevines curling over wooden trellises, and strips of linen dyed with crushed berries hanging out to dry. The colors glow in the sun, like soft flags welcoming you into a festival that hasn't yet begun but is already alive. You smell roasted barley, figs simmering in clay pots, and the unmistakable temps of wine still in its early fermenting stage. The sweetness in the air deepens. And then, slowly, you realize something. The honey, this new honey, shaped by Dionysus's lesson, is here. You step closer to a long table where villagers are preparing offerings for the upcoming Dionysia. Instead of the usual jars of light, simple honey, the ones set out this season are darker, thicker, almost amber-red in the afternoon sun. Their fragrance is richer, layered, almost velvety. You lean over one jar, and the aroma rises to meet you, floral but not sharp, gentle but undeniably deep. It's not the kind of sweetness that shouts. It's the kind that whispers, like someone leaning close to tell you a bedtime secret. You feel your shoulders soften without even trying. A woman ladles a spoonful out and drizzles it over small rounds of soft cheese laid out on fig leaves. The honey stretches into a slow, luxurious thread, glowing like molten sunset. A gift from the new flowers in the woods, she says. Even though you're fairly certain she has no idea what really happened in those woods. When she offers you a taste, you lift the leaf, breathe in, and feel the warmth drift up your nose. The flavor that touches your tongue is richer than anything you've had so far, quietly sweet, rounded, and so soothing that your eyelids betray you and sink just a little. It's like your whole nervous system sends a memo. More of that, please. The villagers murmur to each other about how this year's honey will change the festival dishes. They joke about crowds falling asleep too fast, about wine turning to mellow, about Dionysus blessing them with a sweetness that feels like a lullaby. You almost laugh, because if they knew the full story, the restless god teaching bees like tiny, confused students, they might faint from either delight or disbelief. But people love their mysteries. And maybe that's why these stories linger across centuries. As you continue walking among the preparations, you notice large mixing bowls where honey is being folded into dough. A baker explains that for the Dionysia, bread must carry the energy of both the vine and the hive. Usually, this symbolism is poetic, but this year, thanks to Dionysus's meddling, it's literal. The honey is so potent that it changes the dough's aroma entirely. You smell herbs, fruit blossoms, and something like the memory of soft nights spent near warm hearths. You inhale again just to be sure you're not imagining it. A man nearby stirs honey into wine. You watch the swirl of gold disappearing into deep purple like galaxies merging. He laughs and says he has no idea how strong the drink will be this year. Hopefully fewer people climb the roofs, he mutters. and the villagers all nod in agreement with the kind of weary tone you only hear from people who have seen far too much festival enthusiasm. You can't help but smile. Humans, across time, are remarkably consistent. You notice something odd though. The bees themselves are drifting around the edges of the festival, lazily floating near the grapevines, but they don't look frantic or restless the way bees usually are around sugary offerings. Instead, they fly more slowly, dipping their wings like they're gliding on little invisible currents. It's peaceful enough that one nearly lands on your hand before drifting away again. Villagers point at them with quiet fascination. Some say it's a sign, others say it's nothing, and someone mutters. Historians still debate whether Dionysus truly influenced the bees, or if it was just a strange blooming season. You smile at that. People will always debate miracles. It's part of the charm of history. The deeper you wander into the celebration area, the more you sense how profoundly the new honey is shaping things. Usually, the festival's preparations feel frantic. People rushing, shouting instructions, fumbling with pottery, worrying about whether the wine will ferment in time, or whether the musicians will show up sober. But this year, there's a softness in the air. Hands move slower, voices stay calm. Even the goats tied near the outskirts look unusually serene, chewing thoughtfully as though contemplating ancient philosophy. You sit down beside a low marble fountain, watching the final rays of sunlight stretch across the festival ground. Dionysus settles next to you, giving you one of those sidelong glances that says he knows you've put together the significance of all this. He doesn't speak, not yet, but the look carries its own meaning. The honey changed more than flavor. It changed mood, pace, presence. It brought something the people didn't know they were missing. A sweetness that relaxes, a sweetness that soothes, a sweetness that carries the faint echo of dreams. You exhale, long and slow, letting the gentle hum of preparations wash over you. Somewhere in the distance, a musician plucks the first notes of a lyre. The sound is soft enough to melt into the evening air. You watch as villagers lay out honey cakes, fruit platters, small jars meant as offerings. Every jar glows like captured dusk, and as you sit there, letting your senses absorb it all, you realize this moment, this quiet intersection of mythology, agriculture, and human longing is one of those rare points where history and legend blur in the gentlest possible way. You don't need to decide which part is true. You just breathe in the sweetness and let it settle. You wander along the bustling market path where traders from distant regions have gathered, the scent of salt from the nearby sea mingling with the perfume of fresh herbs and crushed grapes. The sun is warm on your skin, but not uncomfortably so, more like a gentle reminder that you are awake, alive, and part of something larger than yourself. You catch sight of the jars first, neatly stacked on low wooden tables, their amber contents glowing as if someone had trapped a sunset inside. These are not just ordinary jars of honey. They are the traveling vessels of a delicate alchemy that carries both story and flavor across the Aegean. You can feel the weight of history in them, even lighter than the ceramic, heavier than the gold that kings once hoarded. Like a secret you'd whisper to a friend, but never speak aloud. And just thinking about how fragile they are, how one careless bump could ruin all this sweetness, makes you almost hold your breath. Dionysus moves ahead, weaving between merchants and their wares, guiding you like a conductor leading an orchestra of scents, sounds, and subtle gestures. You notice the variety of vessels. Some are wrapped in straw, some sealed with pitch, some even carried in small leather satchels, designed to be worn on the shoulder like a traveler's backpack. You realize that each jar is more than just honey. It is a carrier of culture, a messenger, an ingredient in meals and rituals far from its origin. You bend down to examine one closely. The honey inside shimmers, amber shifting to gold and then to a soft russet as the sun catches it at different angles. It smells floral, but not in the way that makes you think of a perfume store. It is earthy, grounded, yet it lifts your spirits in the same way a well-timed melody might. You wonder, not for the first time, whether Dionysus himself whispers secrets to each jar before it leaves the forest. As you continue, you overhear traders discussing routes along the Aegean islands. The jars are not simply being sold, they are being exchanged, gifted, sometimes bartered for rare spices or fine cloth. You catch phrases like this: honey carries more than sweetness. It carries fortune, and the islands will taste the festival long before the festival arrives. The idea is both practical and poetic. Honey that has traveled, like stories that have traveled, becomes richer the more hands it passes through. And the thought of these small golden vessels crisscrossing the ancient seas, sometimes in rowboats, sometimes on larger merchant ships, makes you picture a flotilla of floating amber, drifting along the waves. You smile because, in a way, it reminds you of modern couriers delivering coffee or tea, except far more mysterious and infinitely slower. You pause near a small wharf, where a couple of sailors are gently unloading crates of honey, careful not to jostle the precious cargo. Their hands are strong, yet their movements delicate. You imagine what it would be like if a single jar were dropped, not just the waste of precious food, but the loss of stories, whispers, and subtle influence across islands. Someone comments that the honey will be ready in time for local feasts, and another mentions that a few jars will continue all the way to the mainland. You can almost picture the faces of festival goers, eyes widening at a taste they have never experienced before. You even think about how one tiny drop of this traveling honey could subtly influence a banquet. The conversation, the laughter, small ripples that change the tone of an evening, the way a single note can change a song. Historians still debate whether the significance of these jars was truly cultural, economic, or something more elusive. And you realize, as you smell the sun-warmed honey, that part of its magic is that no one will ever be entirely sure. A young apprentice walks by, balancing 2 jars on a tray, and almost collides with you. You steady the tray with a careful hand and feel the warmth radiating from the honey. He smiles, embarrassed, muttering that he'll need to practice more before he can carry so much responsibility without shaking. You pat his shoulder and nod, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie, as if you are all part of this same web of sweetness, traveling together across the islands, guiding the jars from one set of hands to another. You can't help but think it's like a relay race. Except instead of a baton, it's a golden, sticky treasure that carries knowledge, flavor, and a hint of divine mischief. You notice a cluster of merchants huddled around a table, pointing at maps and drawing lines in the sand with sticks. They are plotting routes that will take honey to remote villages, using both land and sea paths. You crouch beside them, peering at the crude maps, trying to imagine the distances involved, the timing of tides, the patience required to move these jars without losing a drop. Someone laughs at the absurdity of it all, remarking that modern postal services could hardly compete with this network of golden sweetness. And you chuckle quietly, imagining a postal worker in 2025 carefully transporting honey like this. Clipboard in hand, tiny bees hovering around like inspectors. Dionysus snickers beside you at your thoughts, eyes twinkling, and you realize he enjoys the little human analogies as much as you do. Even gods, you think, appreciate humor in the ordinary. Across the wharf, you spot an older woman tying straw around a jar and whispering to it in a language you don't understand. You wonder whether she is blessing it, protecting it, or merely talking to pass time. Perhaps she believes, as many did, that these jars carry more than physical sweetness, they carry the essence of celebration itself. Nearby, a small child dips a finger into a leftover honey sample and giggles, sticky little trails glinting in the sun. The woman doesn't scold him, she merely smiles, as if the child is both a witness and participant in the centuries-long journey of these jars. You watch, fascinated by how human behavior and divine influence intertwine in the simplest of gestures. Historians still debate the exact extent to which Dionysus's lessons impacted trade and festival culture. But standing here, watching jars move between hands, you sense that something profound is happening. Whether fully understood or not, you follow Dionysus toward a cluster of small islands, barely visible across a narrow channel of water. The honey is destined for each, carried by fishermen and merchants who have learned the rhythm of tides and winds. You imagine the journey across choppy waves, jars nestled in woven baskets, lids sealed with pitch, rocking gently in sync with the motion of the sea. You can almost hear the faint hum of bees, as if the essence of their earlier lessons still rides with the jars, whispering across the water. You breathe in deeply, feeling the salty air mix with the floral sweetness, a union of land and sea, of effort and result, of human diligence and divine guidance. One sailor laughs, saying he hopes the jars reach the island elders before the moon rises too high, or they'll all be eager to taste immediately, leading to feasts in the middle of the night. You picture villagers, sleepy yet delighted, jars opened, honey drizzled over roasted figs or dipped into warm bread. You imagine the subtle change in conversation, the lightness, the laughter, the sighs of contentment that ripple across the room. It's a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it is the magic of the traveling jars. They carry more than flavor. They carry mood, ritual, and the subtle pulse of history itself. Finally, as you stand at the edge of the wharf watching a small boat set off toward its first island, you take a moment to appreciate the web of hands, hearts, and divine whispers that have brought you here. The jars are more than containers. They are vessels of continuity, culture, and joy. Each one is a miniature ambassador, bridging vineyards, forests, seas, and settlements, carrying a taste that transcends mere sweetness. You feel Dionysus's presence in the gentle breeze, in the bees hovering near the ship, and in the subtle gleam of amber sunlight through honey. And as the boat drifts away, you can't help but smile, knowing that this journey of jars, of flavors, of laughter, of whispers will continue long after you have turned away, rippling softly into countless meals, festivals, and dreams yet to come. You step carefully into the sun-dappled vineyards, the earth warm beneath your sandals, and the air filled with the mingling scents of ripe grapes and distant wildflowers. It feels as though every leaf and vine has its own tiny heartbeat, pulsing softly in the gentle breeze, and you realize that these are no ordinary vineyards. They are places where the lessons of Dionysus, the mischief-laden god of wine and revelry, have left traces not just in the soil, but in the very rhythm of life around them. You watch a pair of bees weaving between the grape clusters, their delicate wings catching light like fragments of stained glass, and you can almost hear the soft, harmonious hum that accompanies their labor. It is subtle but persistent, a reminder that even in work there is poetry. You lean down, brushing a vine gently with your fingers, and feel the sticky residue of morning dew, mixed with a hint of sweetness from the early grapes. It tickles your fingertips, and you think, in modern terms, it's as if nature had decided to gift you a miniature tasting session before the festival even begins. The relationship between bees and vineyards seems almost magical, yet it is grounded in attentive observation that stretches back generations. The grapevines here are shaped carefully, trained along wooden trellises, yet the bees, buzzing from flower to flower, do not merely pollinate, they seem to guide, influence, even counsel the growth of the grapes in a way that the ancients revered. You notice that the grapes closest to where the bees hover appear slightly more golden, their skins glimmering as if kissed by the sun and blessed by unseen hands. Dionysus strolls ahead of you, hands tucked into his flowing robe, glancing back every so often with that impish grin. He seems pleased, perhaps because these interactions between bees and vines are the very embodiment of his teachings. That sweetness, whether in honey or in grapes, is never solitary. It thrives in cooperation, in the quiet understanding between living beings. Scholars still debate the precise influence of these early beekeeping techniques on grape cultivation, but standing here, inhaling the mingled perfume of flora and fruit, you sense that even the debates carry the faint hum of divine orchestration. You crouch to inspect a particular vine, watching a bee land lightly on a tiny cluster of flowers that will eventually become grapes. Its legs carry grains of pollen that, when transferred to the flowers, will eventually affect the fruit's subtle nuances. It is as if the bees are connoisseurs of taste, applying their tiny, almost imperceptible expertise with absolute precision. You notice other insects darting about, none in conflict with the bees, but coexisting in an intricate dance, like orchestra members, each understanding their silent cue. Dionysus leans down next to you and whispers, "It's all about balance," and you nod, feeling a laugh bubbling, because in modern times, people would pay thousands for wine that captures such balance, unaware that it has been orchestrated over centuries with nothing more than wind, sun, and patient bees. He winks, and you feel a warmth, a shared amusement, as if the god himself appreciates that human fascination with what has always been freely available. The sun rises higher, glinting off dewladen leaves and spilling its golden light across the vineyard, and you find yourself following Dionysus along narrow dirt paths, winding between rows of vines. Each path seems to hum with the echoes of centuries of careful cultivation. You notice faint notches carved into some of the wooden trellises, marks left by vintners long gone, perhaps measuring growth or marking harvest cycles. It is here, in these small details, that you realize the true depth of the symbiosis. Every vine, every bee, every whisper of wind has a story, and humans are but humble listeners. Even the occasional bee sting, though it pricks sharply, reminds you of the stakes and the intensity of life that produces something as seemingly simple as honey or wine. Dionysus chuckles beside you as you flinch at a sting, murmuring that even gods are careful where they step when bees are near. You grin sheepishly, imagining a modern beekeeper in full protective gear wobbling like a cartoon character while the bees go about their business. Further along, you come across a small stone marker, weathered and half covered in moss. It marks a boundary where the grapes from one plot were historically said to produce a flavor unique to that soil and sun combination. Bees are frequent visitors here, more numerous than in other sections, and their work is visibly reflected in the vigor and luster of the grapes. You bend closer to examine the leaves, noting tiny punctures, almost imperceptible, where the bees have grazed lightly, perhaps gathering nectar or ensuring pollen transfer. You smile because in today's terms, it's as if these vineyards are running a sophisticated quality control system entirely powered by nature itself. Historians still debate how much intentionality there was in ancient practices versus serendipity. But as you watch a bee pause, rotate delicately, and then continue on, you understand that some secrets are best left to observation rather than rigid explanation. A gentle breeze picks up, carrying the faint laughter of distant workers and the soft rustle of leaves. Dionysus moves between the rows with the easy grace of one accustomed to both divine and earthly domains. You follow, noting the way he gestures subtly towards certain flowers, and how the bees respond, almost as if reading his intentions. You think about the countless generations that have observed similar interactions, writing, sketching, recording measurements and weather patterns, yet leaving room for mystery and wonder. Some of these notes are still studied today, hinting at early experiments that combined beekeeping with viticulture to influence flavor profiles. Scholars still debate the method's efficacy, but standing amidst the vines and hearing the low hum of bees against the faint buzz of human activity, you sense that the truth is as much in the sensory experience as in written records. At midday, a small group of villagers arrives to inspect the ripening grapes, carrying baskets and simple tools. They move quietly, respectful of the bees, whose buzzing fills the space like soft background music. A child steps lightly, pointing to a bee perched on a flower and giggling, as if they have stumbled upon a tiny, winged teacher. Dionysus smiles at the child, whispering that sometimes the smallest observers learn the most. You think about how modern classrooms could take a note from this vineyard: quiet observation, subtle guidance, and the importance of letting natural rhythms dictate the pace of learning. It is humorous to imagine teachers today trying to keep up with winged instructors who refuse to sit still or follow a lesson plan. The group moves along the rows, tasting grapes, noting subtle differences in sweetness, texture, and aroma. You notice that the sections most frequented by bees produce grapes with slightly more concentrated flavors, a phenomenon that even contemporary scientists find fascinating. You lean down, smelling the grape clusters, and are amazed at the depth of scent, the hints of honey and floral undertones, and the way sunlight seems to amplify each note. It's almost musical, the way each cluster hits a different chord on your senses. Dionysus hums a low tune, his presence making the experience feel like a ritual. You chuckle because it feels like attending a concert where the orchestra includes both humans and insects. And yet everyone is perfectly in sync. No conductor needed, though Dionysus seems to enjoy the honorary title. Later, as the sun tilts toward afternoon, you pause near a trellis where bees cluster more densely. Observing their careful choreography, you notice subtle differences in grape coloration, and it occurs to you that the bees' work might even influence sugar content or acidity, a connection that historians and modern viticulturists still debate. You reach out to gently touch a vine, your fingers brushing against tiny hairs that seem to vibrate faintly, as if the plant itself were resonating with life. You laugh softly at the sensation, comparing it to running your hand over a gently vibrating smartphone, but far more organic and alive. Dionysus nods in quiet approval, enjoying your modern analogies, perhaps pleased that human imagination continues to find parallels even across millennia. By late afternoon, the vineyard stretches out like a quilt of green and gold, dotted with the occasional bright flower that bees favor. You notice a few jars of honey resting nearby, harvested from the same area and waiting to be carried toward distant markets. It strikes you how intertwined the destinies of grapes and honey have become, each shaping and enhancing the other in subtle ways. A warm smile crosses your face as you think about how such collaboration between humans, bees, and vines has rippled through time, influencing not just flavors and festivals, but habits, rituals, and even storytelling. Scholars still debate how much of this was intentional and how much simply emerged from observation. But you realize that the mystery is part of the joy as you leave the vineyard, your senses saturated with aroma, color, and sound. You glance back to see Dionysus standing amidst the rows, arms folded, observing the subtle interactions of bees and grapes one last time. The sun glints off the leaves, casting a golden shimmer over everything, and you feel the gentle tug of history and myth intertwining. You carry with you the hum of bees, the sweetness of grapes, and the understanding that even the smallest creatures, given guidance and freedom, can shape the course of culture and taste for generations. And you know, deep in your bones, that this delicate symbiosis will continue, quietly, humbly, beautifully, across centuries yet to come. You step onto the gentle cliffs overlooking the Aegean, the sea stretching endlessly before you, its surface glinting like shattered sapphires under the afternoon sun. The salty breeze carries whispers of distant islands, the faint cries of gulls, and a subtle sweetness that reminds you of honey and sun-warmed grapes alike. You walk along the narrow path, careful not to disturb the wildflowers, clinging stubbornly to the rocks. Their petals a riot of colors, soft purples, golden yellows, and fiery reds all competing quietly for your attention. Each flower seems to have been placed with the precision of a painter, and yet, there is a natural randomness that makes it more enchanting than any carefully designed garden. You bend to inhale the scent of one delicate bloom, and the perfume is almost intoxicating. It is floral, yes, but there is a hint of something else, something deep, earthy, with a sweetness that reminds you of the festivals back in the vineyards, where bees and grapes wove their quiet magic. And you think, if you had to describe this to a modern audience, it would be like standing inside a perfume laboratory, run entirely by nature itself, but with fewer lab coats and more gentle breezes. Dionysus appears beside you, almost materializing out of the sunlight, his robes catching the wind and moving with an effortless grace. He points toward the islands in the distance, where, legend has it, he once experimented with new flavors of honey, seeking that elusive balance between floral sweetness and the deep resonance of the sea breeze. You imagine him standing exactly where you now stand centuries ago, perhaps tasting drops of honey that had absorbed not just the nectar of flowers, but also the essence of the Aegean winds themselves. The thought makes you grin because, honestly, trying to replicate that today would require more than just modern culinary skill. It would demand patience, observation, and maybe a small touch of divine inspiration. Historians still debate how much of these honey experiments were factual and how much were romanticized tales. But standing here, with the breeze brushing your face, you sense the plausibility and the charm of it all. you hear the faint buzz of bees in the distance, traveling across the islands to collect nectar from the wildflowers, some of which are unique to this region. Each bee carries a tiny fragment of sweetness, a particle of sun and soil, and a whisper of life itself. Watching them, you realize that Dionysus' influence on these bees might have been subtle, yet profound. His presence could have guided their patterns, nudged them toward particular flowers, or even inspired local beekeepers to notice differences in taste. You step closer to a patch of wild thyme, its flowers glowing softly in the sun, and see several bees hopping methodically from bloom to bloom. You can almost feel the quiet excitement of discovery that must have pervaded those early days of experimentation. It is humorous to imagine that Dionysus, god of revelry and mischief, was also a patient and meticulous teacher for these tiny, winged students. You laugh softly, picturing him offering bees tiny cups of nectar, like a barista preparing a delicate espresso, complete with frothy foam. All while the islands sway gently beneath the Aegean sun, the interplay between sea air and floral scents creates a tapestry of aromas that is difficult to You inhale deeply, and each breath seems to carry multiple layers of history. The whisper of festivals long past, the soft footfalls of ancient travelers who carried honey jars along rocky paths, and the faint echo of laughter from gatherings that celebrated the union of grapes, bees, and human ingenuity. Dionysus gestures toward one particular island, and you notice a small grove of wildflowers clustered near the shore, their roots clinging to jagged rock, their petals bright against the blue horizon. He explains that this was one of his experimental sites, where honey extracted from these blooms was said to have a particularly profound effect on the sweetness of wine during the Dionysia festivals. You chuckle because modern sommeliers might swoon over a taste like this. Yet here, in the natural chaos of the Aegean, the effect is subtle and intertwined with the environment in ways that no tasting note could ever fully capture. Scholars still debate the accuracy of these accounts, but observing the harmony of bees, flowers, and grapes here makes the story resonate vividly. As you wander along the cliffside path, your bare feet brushing against soft tufts of grass and the occasional stone, you see a small group of islands in the distance that seem almost like stepping stones across the sea. Each island, according to legend, hosted unique floral varieties that contributed to the regional diversity of honey. Dionysus hums a gentle tune, and you feel the rhythm in your chest, as if the islands themselves are part of an ancient symphony. The bees, unaware of their mythic context, flit tirelessly between blooms, and you smile at the contrast between their simple purpose and the grandeur of the story surrounding them. A few leaves drift past you, carried by the wind like natural confetti, and you laugh because even nature seems to enjoy a little bit of revelry without needing any human prompting. You pause by a craggy outcrop, where the wind whistles softly through a small crevice, creating a haunting but comforting melody. Here Dionysus shares a peculiar anecdote that he once observed a bee hesitating between two flowers, and the tiny hesitation influenced the flavor of an entire batch of honey that would later be celebrated at a festival. It's funny, yet oddly believable, and you find yourself imagining the chain reaction from a single bee's choice, all the way to the grand celebrations of humans savoring wine and honey. You chuckle because, in modern terms, it is like a barista's minute tweak to a latte recipe somehow affecting an entire city's morning ritual. Absurd, yet profound. Historians remain divided on whether these tales were carefully observed facts or playful embellishments, but standing amidst the island's soft breezes, the story seems both plausible and enchanting. Further along, the path narrows, winding between low stone walls and patches of hardy flowers. Resilient in the salty wind, you notice a small jar, perched on a rock half buried in sand. Its surface is etched with faint symbols, perhaps markings from a long-forgotten beekeeping tradition, or a subtle nod from Dionysus himself. You pick it up carefully, feeling the cool weight of history in your hands. Inside, there is a residue of honey, its aroma a delicate fusion of wildflowers, sea air, and sun-baked stone. The complexity of its scent is remarkable, almost like nature compressed centuries of observation, care, and accident into one tiny vessel. You can't help but grin at the thought that a simple jar could hold so much history and myth simultaneously. Scholars debate how widespread such experimental honey was across the Aegean, and whether Dionysus' role was real or purely symbolic. But for you, holding this jar makes the connection tangible in a way that writings and illustrations never could. You sit for a moment on a smooth rock, letting the breeze tousle your hair, and watch the bees flitting tirelessly from bloom to bloom. Each seems purposeful, yet playful, and you realize the symmetry of the ecosystem. Flowers need bees need flowers, and humans observing, recording, celebrating tie it all together. Dionysus leans casually beside you, smiling as he watches a bee hover almost comically, wings vibrating too fast for the eye to see. You chuckle at the absurdity, imagining that in some parallel universe, these bees might have had tiny festival hats and musical instruments. You inhale the combination of salt, sun, and floral sweetness, and think about the festivals back on the mainland, where wine, honey, and human celebration mingled in harmony. Much like the elements here, undisturbed, beautiful, and fleetingly perfect. The afternoon wanes, and shadows stretch long across the islands, softening the colors of flowers, rocks, and sea alike. You notice a small weathered path leading toward a secluded cove, where water laps quietly against smooth stones. Dionysus gestures toward the cove, hinting that some of his most delicate honey tastings were conducted in similarly quiet, isolated places, allowing the natural environment to imprint subtly on the flavor. You crouch to inspect the tiny flowers lining the cove, noting their rich hues and subtle fragrance. The bees flit around, undisturbed, a living bridge between myth and reality. Historians still argue about whether these tastings ever occurred in such meticulous isolation. But standing here, with sun, salt, and sound forming a living orchestra, it feels entirely credible. You smile, thinking how often modern humans overlook such delicate intersections of nature and culture, relying instead on artificial replication that can never truly capture this gentle symphony. As the sun begins its descent, painting the islands in shades of gold and rose, you rise and take a slow walk back along the cliff path. The bees continue their tireless work. The flowers nod in the evening breeze, and the Aegean glimmers softly under the fading light. Dionysus walks beside you, sharing quiet comments, some whimsical, some instructive, and you find yourself laughing softly at his modern analogies. He compares island bees to social media influencers, and you chuckle at the absurd yet fitting comparison. Each step carries you farther from the central myths, yet closer to an intimate understanding of how honey, islands, bees, and a little godly mischief shaped not only flavors, but stories, rituals, and even human imagination itself. By the time you reach the edge of the cliffs and look back, the islands are bathed in soft twilight, their edges blurred slightly by the warm haze. You feel a deep calm, the kind that settles in the chest after a day of quiet observation and gentle wonder. The sweetness in the air, the hum of bees, and the remembered taste of honey at festivals long past mingle in your senses, leaving a lingering impression of interconnectedness. You carry with you the gentle reminder that nature, myth, and human curiosity are entwined in ways that resist simple explanation, but delight in every small revelation. Standing there, with Dionysus' approving smile echoing in your mind, you understand that the legacy of these tiny winged messengers and their divine observer extends far beyond what is written, lingering in flavor, story, and imagination across the Aegean and beyond. The hillside is quiet now, and the warm light of late afternoon spills gently across the sloping meadow, brushing the wildflowers and patches of thyme with gold. You walk slowly along the narrow path, your steps barely stirring the air, and feel a soft hush settling over the landscape, as if the world itself is leaning in to listen. The faint hum of bees accompanies you like a delicate soundtrack, a whisper of life and energy that persists even as the sun begins to tilt toward the horizon. You inhale deeply, the mixture of salt from distant sea breezes and the floral notes from nearby blooms filling your lungs. It's a subtle symphony of scents, reminding you of the rich interplay of nature, and you can't help but smile, imagining how Dionysus might have found inspiration here centuries ago. You shuffle along, feeling the crunch of tiny stones beneath your sandals, and think, you'd never get this kind of sensory immersion in a modern supermarket aisle, trust me, your imagination would be bored stiff. Ahead, you notice a small grove tucked into a shallow depression in the hillside, where the wildflowers are denser, their colors deeper, almost like the petals are soaking in the lingering warmth of the sun. Dionysus gestures toward this spot with a flourish of his hand, and you realize you are about to witness one of the quietest, most deliberate lessons he has ever orchestrated for his tiny, winged pupils. The bees seem to sense the significance to their flight pattern grows more purposeful, circling slowly around clusters of blooms, dipping and rising with an almost choreographed rhythm. You chuckle at the thought, picturing the bees in tiny velvet vests, taking notes on their minuscule clipboards. Of course, in reality, the lesson is far subtler. Dionysus waves his arms in a dance-like motion, and you watch as the bees respond, moving from flower to flower in patterns that seem to encode messages in the air. Historians still debate the veracity of these tales, wondering whether such precise bee choreography was real or poetic exaggeration. But standing here, you can almost feel the plausibility as the movement unfolds around you. You settle on a smooth stone at the edge of the grove, letting your legs dangle and watching as sunlight flares through gaps in the canopy. Dionysus moves among the bees, sprinkling faint traces of flower pollen along their paths, a subtle encouragement that sends them toward particular blooms. The scene is mesmerizing. Each bee is both student and performer, and the hillside itself becomes a living classroom. You notice the variety of flowers, vivid reds of poppies, delicate blues of cornflowers, and soft white daisies, all contributing nectar with slightly different notes of sweetness, which, when combined by the bees, creates complex and unique honey flavors. You think of the modern term terroir, and it makes you smile. Centuries before sommeliers would formalize such ideas, these bees and their divine instructor were already mastering them in their own natural, chaotic elegance. You lean back and let your eyes wander, catching glimpses of Dionysus' robes fluttering like a gentle flame against the greens and golds of the hillside. And you think about how mythology and observation entwined to create knowledge that was both mystical and practical. The air is alive with soft, subtle sounds, wings vibrating, leaves rustling, and the distant echo of water from a hidden spring trickling down the slope. You notice a particularly bold bee hovering near a patch of rare lavender, its tiny legs dusted with pollen that sparkles in the late sun. Dionysus approaches, whispering quietly, almost that this is one of the flowers he favors for experimental sweetness. You raise an eyebrow, amused by the idea of a god conducting taste experiments like some ancient, ethereal You laugh softly, realizing that the lessons of the hillside are not just about honey or bees, they are about attention, observation, and patience, qualities that humans often rush through in their daily lives. The bees, unconcerned with schedules or modern expectations, follow their instincts and the subtle guidance of Dionysus, creating order from chaos in a way that is elegant and poetic. It's hard not to feel a pang of envy for their focused purpose, especially when juxtaposed with your own scattered, caffeine-fueled attempts to organize the day. Dionysus leads you further along the grove to a gentle slope where a series of small rocks form natural steps. He explains, in his quiet melodic voice, that he uses these rocks to create microhabitats for different bee colonies. Some bees prefer the cooler shadows cast by stones, while others bask in the sun-soaked tops, and the combination encourages diversity in foraging patterns. You notice how the bees adjust seamlessly, hopping between sun and shade with almost imperceptible grace. You grin at the thought that even in the modern world, where climate-controlled hives exist, few people consider such microecologies when harvesting honey. Historians continue to debate whether these meticulous arrangements were widespread or limited to a few inspired experiments. But the underlying principle, attentiveness to nature's subtle cues, remains timeless. You watch a bee settle on a tiny violet, and the way it gathers nectar makes you think of a miniature artist at work, delicately blending pigments to create a perfect shade. It is funny and wonderful at once. A light breeze rolls across the hillside, carrying hints of salt, herbs, and the faint sweetness of ripening honey. Dionysus motions toward a small gathering of bees clustered near a particularly aromatic patch of thyme. He murmurs that these bees have a natural aptitude for detecting subtle differences in nectar, and that he often lets them choose which flowers to visit first. You laugh quietly, imagining a bee auditioning for a role in the grand festival of flavors, and the god chuckles along with you. The rhythm of the lesson is gentle and deliberate. Dionysus moves, bees respond, and you observe with growing fascination. It's a soft, hypnotic pattern, almost like a SMR in real life. The faint hums, rustling, and murmur of the wind all layering into a soothing, almost musical environment. You feel your breathing slow to match the pace of the scene, and the hillside itself seems to exhale with you. Scholars still argue over how much of Dionysus's instruction was real guidance versus symbolic storytelling, but the effect on both honey and imagination is undeniably profound. You wander slightly off the path to peer at a small hollow where a few bees cluster around a hidden bloom. Dionysus whispers, pointing toward a tiny stone ledge, that these particular bees are experimenting with scent combinations. You raise your eyebrows, amused that even in the animal world there seems to be a form of curiosity-driven research. Though obviously without notebooks or pens, you picture a tiny conference of bees, debating the merits of lavender versus thyme like a boardroom meeting in miniature, and the image makes you chuckle softly. The lesson here is subtle. Observation, patience, and attentiveness can yield results far beyond immediate expectations. The hillside, the blooms, the bees, and the god himself are orchestrating a quiet, ongoing experiment that informs not only honey flavors but human understanding of nature's intricate interconnections. Historians continue to debate the exact methods, but the wonder of it remains undiminished. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the wildflowers and bees, Dionysus guides you to a secluded clearing where the last rays of light warm a small circle of rocks. Here, the bees perform their final flight pattern for the day, weaving through flowers in a delicate arc, as if painting invisible murals across the landscape. You laugh softly, imagining the bees critiquing each other's formations like tiny art critics. The god smiles, noting that the success of these flights will influence the sweetness of honey for festivals and offerings. It's funny and whimsical, yet somehow deeply meaningful. You inhale the gentle perfume of blooms and pollen, and the quiet magic of this hillside wraps around you. The air seems heavier now with lingering honey scents, warm sunlight, and the subtle hum of tireless wings. Even without witnessing the grand festivals, you feel the impact of these tiny efforts stretching through time before leaving. You crouch to examine a particularly vibrant patch of flowers near the clearing. You notice a bee hovering, its tiny body sparkling in the waning light as it collects nectar from a delicate bloom. Dionysus whispers that this single bee, over time, could influence the flavor of honey consumed across the islands. The thought makes you giggle. How can such a small creature have such a significant effect? Yet standing here, observing the rhythm of flight, the patient diligence, and the subtle instruction of a god, it feels entirely plausible. Historians still debate the extent to which these narratives reflect historical reality, but the sensory richness, the interwoven lessons of observation, patience, and attentiveness resonate in a way that transcends factual accuracy. You rise to your feet, feeling a quiet satisfaction, a sense of connection to the hillside, the bees, and the stories of gods and mortals intertwined across centuries. The sun finally kisses the horizon, painting the sky in soft purples and deep oranges. You take one last look over the hillside, the wildflowers glowing softly in twilight, the bees making their final flights, and Dionysus standing with serene grace beside you. The lesson of this quiet hillside resonates. Patience, attentiveness, and gentle guidance can cultivate beauty, sweetness, and subtlety that ripple far beyond the immediate moment. You step back, the warm light fading gently, and carry with you the delicate impression of this magical intersection of nature, myth, and mindful observation, a memory to savor as one savors the last drops of honey, lingering, rich, and quietly transformative. The air feels cooler now as you follow Dionysus down a narrow path lined with wild herbs and grasses, their scents mingling into a subtle, almost hypnotic perfume that drifts around you. You step lightly, careful not to crush the delicate stems, and notice the sun dipping lower, casting a soft amber glow across the rolling hillside. Every so often, a breeze stirs, and the mingled fragrances of thyme, lavender, and honeyed wildflowers seem to swirl into an invisible waltz that envelops both you and the bees. The path opens up into a small sunlit clearing where Dionysus pauses and gestures toward a scattering of smooth stones, each one slightly sun-warmed and perfect for sitting. You lower yourself onto a stone, the heat seeping through your clothing, and realize that you are about to witness yet another chapter in his subtle instruction, a recipe, delicate and almost lost to time, that was crafted to honor both the bees and the gods. Blending flavors and rituals in ways that few mortals remember today, you can't help but smile at the thought of following an ancient cooking class led by a deity who seems part teacher, part mischievous conductor of sweet symphonies. You think honestly, a modern cooking show would be jealous of these ingredients. And the soundtrack is way better than any Spotify playlist. Dionysus kneels by a small patch of flowers and gently gathers a few stems of thyme and lavender, letting the tiny blossoms brush your fingertips as he hands them to you. The flowers carry subtle differences, each scent nuanced, and you are struck by the sensory attention required to distinguish one from another. He explains softly, almost in a whisper, that these herbs will be combined with honey to create a festival sweet meant to surprise and delight. You imagine the honey, golden and thick, carrying subtle traces of these flowers, a flavor profile far more complex than a simple drizzle over bread. It's funny, you think, how the gods of mythology get the fanciest flavor combinations, while humans today are struggling with avocado toast and artisanal jams. Dionysus smiles at your internal joke and gestures toward a shallow stone basin filled with honey, its surface glistening in the last rays of sunlight. You dip a finger lightly and taste the drop, sweet floral and slightly earthy, a small revelation of what ancient gatherings may have savored in celebration, quietly changing the rhythm of festivities in ways no one wrote down in formal histories. Historians still debate whether such festival recipes were widely shared or kept as divine secrets. But standing here, tasting the blend, the magic feels unmistakably tangible. You kneel beside Dionysus as he begins mixing the herbs into the honey, crushing them gently between his fingers to release their essential oils. The aroma deepens, filling the clearing with a rich, almost intoxicating bouquet that reminds you of modern perfumeries, but infinitely more natural and harmonious. You marvel at the simplicity of the process, how deliberate motions and careful observation transform basic ingredients into a layered, fragrant confection. Dionysus hums softly, a melodic murmur that seems to coax the bees nearby into a gentle dance. The bees hover, their tiny bodies glinting in the sunlight, circling the mixture with purpose, as though offering approval or perhaps critiques that only they understand. You stifle a laugh at the image of tiny food critics buzzing over your shoulder, giving 5-star ratings with their wings. In truth, the bees are playing their vital role, spreading pollen, influencing the flavors, and maintaining the subtle balance of the myco-ecosystem that supports both honey production and the sacred recipes of festivals. Some scholars still argue about how much influence the bees had on these concoctions, but the idea that the natural world and divine instruction could intersect in such a meaningful way feels entirely believable now. As Dionysus continues, he introduces a small assortment of wild fruits, tiny figs, tart berries, and even a few unripe grapes that he insists will impart an interesting tang when left to macerate in the honey overnight. You watch him carefully layer these ingredients, almost like an artist composing a painting. The colors are vivid, deep purples, bright reds, and the golden honey forming a rich canvas, he encourages you to do the same, pressing gently to release juices, and as the flavors mingle, you can almost hear the whisper of history, the festival tables of centuries past, the laughter of participants, and the careful notes recorded in diaries or passed down orally through generations. There's a playful absurdity to the moment, too, as you realize this is essentially an ancient form of artisanal jam making, but with a divine mentor and bees as cook. You chuckle, thinking of modern influencers with their camera angles and filters, completely missing the subtlety of what you hold in your hands. The god only smiles knowingly, as if aware that some lessons transcend time and trend. You lean back slightly to observe, the sunlight now deepening into a soft amber haze, and notice the way the bees interact with this concoction. They dip into the mix lightly, wings vibrating softly, carrying micro amounts of honey and pollen back to their hives. It's as though the recipe itself is being tested and refined by these tiny assistants, their actions influencing the eventual flavor and consistency. You marvel at the intricacy, imagining how many festivals might have depended on such subtle contributions from creatures so small. You murmur quietly to yourself, modern chefs would be losing their minds trying to replicate this without the bees, and Dionysus chuckles at your thought, a soft vibration that blends with the evening chorus of wings and rustling leaves. Scholars still debate how much intentionality was behind the integration of bees into these recipes, but the practical outcome is undeniable, honey-flavored, textured, and enhanced in ways human hands alone could not achieve. Dionysus guides you next to a shallow, sun-warmed basin where a few additional herbs await rosemary, marjoram, and a delicate hint of mint. He explains that each herb adds a subtle nuance, a fleeting note to the finished honey, enhancing the experience of the festival. You press gently, inhaling deeply, and feel a faint tingle on your skin as essential oils release. The aroma is mesmerizing, almost intoxicating without overpowering. You watch him slowly mix the herbs with the honey fruit blend, the colors and textures coalescing into a shimmering, golden symphony. It's funny how even in such an ancient practice, the attention to layering flavors and textures mirrors modern culinary techniques, yet remains deeply rooted in ritual and connection to the land. You think about how humans today often overlook these sensory subtleties, rushing past ingredients without pausing to truly notice. Historians remain curious about the origins of these festival recipes, wondering whether similar blends existed in other regions, but for you, witnessing this divine choreography makes the legacy tangible, even if it remains partially hidden in time. The final step involves a gentle resting period, letting the mixture absorb the full spectrum of scents and flavors. Dionysus explains that patience is essential. Rushing this stage would compromise the delicate balance, achieved through careful observation and subtle manipulation of ingredients and environment. You nod, noting the contrast to modern life's obsession with speed and immediacy, and imagine festival goers of old savoring each bite in anticipation and mindfulness. You taste another drop, the flavors unfolding gradually, honey, herbs, fruit, and the subtle echo of wildflowers and pollen carried by diligent bees. The effect is magical, almost meditative, and you realize that this is more than a recipe. It is a lesson in attention, patience, and reverence for both natural processes and divine guidance. Scholars debate whether such exacting practices were typical or rare, but standing here, you feel the truth of it in your senses and in the soft hum of the evening dot as the sun finally sinks, casting the clearing into twilight. Dionysus gestures toward the resting mixture, now fully infused with layered flavors and the influence of bees. You look around at the serene hillside, the whispering wind, and the busy yet harmonious dance of bees settling in their hives for the evening. The ritual is complete, the recipe alive in golden liquid form, ready to enrich festivals and celebrations. You feel a quiet sense of satisfaction and awe, recognizing that what seems like simple sweetness is in fact the culmination of observation, care, divine playfulness, and the intricate patterns of life. Even now, the delicate interplay between human, divine, and natural forces resonates, a subtle yet profound testament to the richness of history and imagination. You rise, brushing your hands lightly against your knees, and take one last look around. The clearing glows faintly in the fading light, the flowers still hinting at their scents, the bees gently moving among them. Dionysus stands beside you, serene and content, knowing that the lessons of patience, observation, and collaboration between divine and natural have been passed on. Even in this small, quiet moment, you inhale deeply, carrying with you the lingering perfume, the gentle hum of wings, and the satisfaction of having participated in something both ancient and alive. The recipe, now lost to most but preserved here in memory and sensation, becomes a symbol of the enduring magic that arises when curiosity, care, and attentive observation meet. The soft hum of bees still lingers in your ears as you step lightly through the quiet clearing, carrying the memory of Dionysus's meticulous hands blending honey, herbs, and fruits. The evening light has shifted into a gentle lavender hue, the kind that makes everything feel softer, almost like velvet draped over the world. You brush past tufts of grass, careful not to crush the delicate stems. and notice a small wooden table, worn and sun-bleached, with a single leather-bound notebook resting atop it. The air smells faintly of honey and wildflowers, a lingering signature of the day's lessons. And as you approach, a sense of anticipation possesses a quiet thrill that's both calming and intriguing. The notebook belongs to one of the elder beekeepers of the region, a meticulous chronicler whose notes capture the subtle, often peculiar behaviors of bees following the sacred rituals of Dionysus. You can't help but grin at the thought that centuries of diligent observation, painstakingly written in careful script, await your eyes. I bet this is where the secret recipes for festival honey are scribbled, you muse, and probably where they complained about bees being divas long before Instagram existed. Opening the notebook, you feel the texture of parchment and ink, the faint impressions of quills pressed into the pages, and the smell of aged paper rises to mingle with the surrounding scents. The pages are filled with intricate drawings of hives, diagrams of flower clusters, and careful notes on the timing of nectar collection. You trace your fingers over the illustrations, imagining the beekeeper observing every minute detail. Which flowers attracted more bees, how the hive responded to sudden storms, or the precise moment when the honey reached the perfect consistency. It's fascinating, almost comical, to realize that despite all the gods, magic, and festival lore, a lot of the real work depended on patient, grounded human observation. You can hear Dionysus's faint chuckle in your imagination, as if approving of this blend of divine inspiration and meticulous human diligence. Historians still debate the extent to which such detailed beekeeper records influenced festival practices. But in your mind, each page is a bridge between the mundane and the mystical, a testament to collaboration across species, humans, and gods alike. Flipping through the notebook, you pause at a series of notes detailing unusual bee behavior following certain floral rituals. Apparently, after a specific combination of lavender, thyme, and wild berries was introduced to the hive, the bees exhibited a curious, almost playful tendency. They would swirl in synchronized patterns, forming ephemeral shapes mid-air, which the ancient chronicler documented with fascination and a hint of humor. You can't help but chuckle at the image of bees executing a tiny aerial ballet, probably making modern dance troupes jealous of their precision. Dionysus must have been delighted to see such behaviors, and perhaps it's why he persisted in these floral experiments for festival preparations. The beekeeper's notes indicate that these behaviors were unpredictable, yet seemed to enhance the flavor and aroma of the honey in ways that ordinary observation could not explain. Scholars still debate the degree of intentionality versus coincidence in these patterns, but standing here, reading the careful observations, you realize the magic is in the convergence of nature, human patience, and divine guidance, a trinity of sweetness and rhythm. The notebook also contains sketches of ritual implements, shallow basins, wooden stirrers, and carved stones used to rest honey jars while infusing them with floral scents. Each item is carefully labeled with measurements and instructions, some surprisingly detailed for a world without modern kitchen scales or thermometers. You notice the beekeeper occasionally scribbled whimsical notes in the margins, such as "do not spill" or "Dionysus will frown or be seem amused." Take notes. The mixture of serious observation and gentle humor is oddly comforting, like finding a friend in the margins of history who understood the delicate balance between discipline and delight. You imagine these notes being whispered among festival participants, shared cautiously, as though the knowledge itself were sacred, yet with small smiles at the unexpected quirks of the bees. Modern chefs and bakers would probably be confounded, both by the lack of precise instruments and by the undeniable influence of divine beings in the recipe. Yet the results speak for themselves, as the honey produced following these meticulous rituals became central to celebrations, subtly shaping flavors and experiences long before cookbooks were even conceived. One section of the notebook focuses on the timing of flower blooming, weather conditions, and the corresponding behavior of bees. The beekeeper had noted, for instance, that a sudden drizzle could dramatically alter the fragrance captured in the honey, creating subtle notes that became highly prized at certain festivals. You smile at the notion that ancient festival organizers might have been as reliant on weather forecasts as modern winemakers, only with a divine advisor hovering nearby instead of meteor. The beekeeper's observations extend to the hives themselves, entrance orientation, temperature inside the hive, and even the subtle vibrations of bees during nectar transfer. You pause to imagine the patience required, standing hours under the sun, watching these tiny creatures perform their essential tasks. It's a humbling thought and a gentle reminder of the interplay between diligence, observation, and natural rhythm, lessons that transcend time and still feel relevant in today's fast-paced world. Historians continue to debate how accurate and standardized these observations were, yet the notebook's meticulous detail reveals a reverence for life and a dedication that feels almost meditative. Among the most charming entries are personal reflections. The beekeeper often comments on the mood of the bees, their playful or stubborn tendencies, and occasional surprises that defied expectation. One note describes a day when the bees refused to leave a particularly fragrant flower patch, as if negotiating terms. and another recounts a hive that seemed unusually spirited following a full moon. These whimsical observations are nestled alongside practical instructions, creating a rhythm of diligence punctuated by wonder. You can't help but laugh softly at the thought of bees having personalities, behaving almost like tiny festival-goers themselves. Dionysus surely found delight in these quirks, understanding that the smallest participants can influence the outcome in unexpected ways. Scholars still debate whether these notes were meant literally or allegorically, yet the tangible joy and keen observation shined through every line. The notebook, in essence, becomes a quiet record of collaboration, magic, and playful reverence, a bridge between human experience and divine spectacle. As you continue exploring, you notice diagrams showing the sequence of mixing herbs and honey, and the careful layering of fruits. The beekeeper marks the exact timing and sequence, occasionally adding small annotations. Patience here, do not rush, or observe the bees they know. You can almost hear the gentle voice of the god echoing in these words, guiding both human and insect hands alike. The combination of herbs, fruits, and honey, when executed with attention, produced a product far richer than its components, much like a well-conducted orchestra, where each note, each instrument, contributes to an ineffable harmony. You savor the thought of tasting these layers, imagining the subtle balance between sweetness, floral notes, and earthy undertones. A symphony recorded not in musical notation but in ink, observations, and meticulous care. It's amusing, too, to think that ancient gastronomic reviews were probably whispered in corners of temples or festival tents rather than posted online. Yet the dedication to quality and experience was equally serious. Toward the end of the notebook, you find careful notes on storage, transport, and presentation of festival honey. Each jar is to be handled gently, left to rest in shaded areas, and presented with a subtle flourish. There's a line noting that honey, infused with certain floral combinations, brings out the laughter and song of the festival, a poetic acknowledgement of how taste and mood intertwine. You imagine festival goers delighting in each bite, their senses awakened and spirits lifted, unaware of the layers of observation, patience, and divine inspiration that went into producing each drop. The combination of science, ritual, and artistry resonates deeply, a reminder that human creativity, when aligned with the rhythms of nature, can yield experiences that touch both body and soul. Historians still discuss how widespread such practices were, but the evidence in this notebook makes the magic tangible, accessible, and remarkably intimate. You close the notebook slowly, savoring the tactile sensation of the leather cover and the memories it contains. The bees have settled for the evening, their soft hum replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. The mixture of joy, patience, and meticulous care recorded here feels like a soft lullaby to the senses. You take a deep breath, letting the scents, textures, and quiet wisdom wash over you, appreciating the bridge between ancient practice and modern imagination. This notebook is more than a collection of observations. It is a whisper across centuries, connecting you to a world where divinity, nature, and humanity met in quiet, purposeful collaboration. You smile, thinking that the essence of these practices, patience, the attention, and the quiet delight in small wonders is a legacy that transcends time, quietly waiting for those who are willing to notice. The sun has begun to dip behind distant hills, casting a warm amber glow over the valleys, and as you walk along the narrow winding path, the scents of the vineyards, wildflowers, and lingering honey fill your senses in a way that feels almost sacred. You can feel the gentle breeze teasing the strands of your hair, carrying whispers of stories long past. Ahead, a small wooden bench rests beneath a twisted olive tree, its gnarled limbs stretching out like ancient arms, inviting you to pause. You settle there, feeling the rough texture of the wood against your skin, and let your gaze drift across the patchwork of fields and hives that Dionysus once moved among, teaching, observing, and enchanting. The moment feels suspended, as though the world itself has softened, preparing you for a quiet reflection on what has unfolded so far. You catch a whiff of honeyed air, sweet yet earthy, reminding you of the diligent bees you followed, the godly guidance, and the human hands that have shaped centuries of subtle, layered sweetness. Opening your mind to the lingering memories of the day, you revisit the countless lessons Dionysus imparted not only on the bees and their behaviors, but also on patience, observation, and reverence for life's minutiae. The legacy of the sweet teacher manifests not only in festival preparations or culinary delights, but in the rhythms of the world itself. The hum of bees, the sway of blossoms, and the harmonious dance between human ingenuity and natural wonder. You imagine the ways in which those who chronicled these rituals carried forward a language of taste and scent, encoded in meticulous notes, sketches, and marginalia that combine practical guidance with playful insight. It's almost humorous to consider that these ancient bakers and beekeepers were the original mix, blending ingredients, rituals, and divine inspiration in a way that prefigured today's obsession with craft and flavor. You can picture Dionysus himself perched quietly on a vine, observing the subtle successes and occasional mishaps with a wry, approving smile, possibly thinking that humans, for all their seriousness, could benefit from a little improvisation now and then. As you reflect, your attention turns to the cultural imprint left by these interactions. The honey, carefully infused with flowers, herbs, and the god's touch, became a signature element in festival foods and celebratory rituals. You recall how festival participants might have marveled at the nuanced flavor, unaware of the painstaking orchestration behind it, the timing of nectar collection, the precise layering of floral notes, and the gentle choreography of bees navigating their hives. This blend of science, art, and divinity created experiences that transcended mere sustenance, embedding joy and communal spirit into the very fabric of social life. You can almost hear laughter echoing across the hills, faint music mingling with the rustle of leaves, and the quiet hum of bees. Each sound a reminder that the sweetness of life is often a shared, carefully cultivated affair. Historians still debate the exact extent of Dionysus's influence on culinary practices, yet it seems clear that the traces of his guidance lingered long after the festivals ended, leaving subtle, enduring marks on culture. Your gaze drifts toward the horizon, where the sea reflects the fading light, and you contemplate the human inclination to preserve, enhance, and ritualize experience. The beekeeper's notebooks, the recipes passed down through generations, and the meticulous care with which honey was infused all testify to an ancient understanding that life's richness is not merely in consumption but in attention, reverence, and the gentle interplay between effort and inspiration. You imagine artisans tasting and adjusting, gods quietly nudging, and bees moving in patterns that, to an untrained eye, appear chaotic, yet serve a delicate, precise purpose. It's a whimsical thought, tiny creatures unknowingly shaping the sensory pleasures of an entire culture. Their small, buzzing presence guiding human hands and divine intention alike. You chuckle softly, thinking how different modern kitchens are: stainless steel counters, electric mixers, timers, and yet the essence of patience and observation remains timeless, quietly echoing across the centuries. The path before you slopes gently downward, leading to a shaded grove where you can hear the faint trickle of water from a hidden spring. You follow the sound, feeling the cool, moist air brushing against your skin, and notice a few bees lazily hovering near wildflowers, their movements deliberate and unhurried. It strikes you that even now, centuries later, the fundamental behaviors Dionysus sought to harmonize continue, subtly shaping the environment and human perception. The bees are tiny historians, unwitting chroniclers of the land's rhythms, translating nectar into stories of flavor, scent, and texture. You bend down to observe one particularly diligent bee, noting its meticulous movements and the way it navigates petals with quiet determination. You wonder if Dionysus ever smiled at such ordinary yet profound moments, knowing that the lessons of patience, care, and subtle joy were embedded not only in grand rituals but in these small, delicate interactions. You continue along the grove, feeling a gentle fatigue settle over your body, a pleasant surrender to the rhythm of the landscape and your own wandering thoughts. It's as if each step is cushioned by the soft hum of history surrounding you, every sound and scent a whisper from centuries past. You muse that this might be the closest one can come to touching both human and divine history, without leaving one's own skin immersed in texture, aroma, and memory, yet fully present in the immediate moment. There's a playful humor in imagining yourself as both student and observer, a participant in a grand tapestry where honey, festival, bees, and gods intertwine. Historians continue to debate the literal versus symbolic meanings of Dionysus's involvement, but standing here, it feels abundantly clear that whether literal or allegorical, the intent was to cultivate joy, attention, and harmony, an enduring lesson wrapped in sweetness. The grove gradually opens to a sun-dappled clearing where remnants of ceremonial jars lie scattered, faintly coated with crystallized honey. You step lightly among them, careful not to disturb the delicate remnants of past rituals, imagining the hands that poured, stirred, and presented these treasures. The jars, once vibrant with infused honey, served not only as sustenance but as vessels carrying the spirit of festivals, the laughter of communities, and the careful orchestration of divine and human collaboration. It's amusing to think that some of these jars might have been passed from hand to hand with solemnity, while others probably elicited playful arguments over whose honey was sweeter. Tension not unlike modern culinary competitions. You smile at the continuity of human delight and pride, a thread connecting you to centuries of practice, observation, and celebration. As twilight deepens, the warmth of the day lingers on your skin, and a gentle hush descends over the grove. You take a deep breath, inhaling the faint, lingering perfume of flowers, earth, and honey, and feel an almost meditative calm settling over you. The quiet allows your thoughts to stretch backward and forward simultaneously, backward to the meticulous bees, the patient beekeepers, and the mischievous god guiding them, and forward to the subtle influences these rituals may have had on countless generations. The notebook entries, the whispered instructions, and the ritualized practices are all threads woven into a tapestry of continuity, revealing the understated ways in which care, observation, and delight shaped culture. You let yourself smile, appreciating both the humor and reverence embedded in these practices, and the gentle pulse of life that persists in the smallest of creatures. Finally, as darkness creeps across the horizon, you settle beneath a flowering bush, feeling the soft hum of the remaining bees, the gentle sway of petals, and the cool, grounding earth beneath you. Your thoughts drift to the broader lessons of Dionysus's sweet teachings, that attentiveness, patience, and gentle play can coexist with purpose, that the smallest creatures and simplest acts carry meaning beyond what is immediately visible, and that delight, when cultivated carefully, resonates far beyond the moment of enjoyment. There's a warmth in this realization, a quiet reassurance that echoes in your chest, and you feel a contented sigh escape, mingling with the faint sounds of the evening. You sense the stories settling around you, their layers softening and blending into a lullaby of bees, blossoms, and the enduring sweetness of mindful care, leaving you with a gentle awareness that history, in all its minutiae, is a tender teacher indeed. As you step quietly through the final stretch of the sun-warmed vineyard, the golden light of late afternoon washes over the rows of vines, each leaf catching the sun like fragments of delicate stained glass. The distant hum of bees has softened into a gentle, almost imperceptible murmur, as if even they are slowing their work in anticipation of evening. You can feel the slight give of the earth beneath your feet, the soft crunch of tiny stones and dry soil mingling with the scent of crushed grape leaves. The air is thick with warmth and the subtle perfume of flowers and ripening fruit, a combination that seems to capture the very essence of this ancient land. You pause for a moment, taking a deep breath and allowing yourself to absorb the scene, the realization settling in that this journey through vineyards, bees, honey, and the playful guidance of Dionysus has been as much about observation and mindfulness as it has been about history itself. It's almost like you've been walking through a living painting, one in which every stroke of color and sound has been carefully composed to teach a gentle lesson. Ahead, near the far edge of the vineyard, you spot a small, weathered jar perched on a low stone wall, its lid slightly ajar and glinting in the fading light. You approach it cautiously, half expecting some lingering magic of Dionysus to hover around the golden liquid inside. This is the last drop of honey, the culmination of countless seasons of labor, divine intervention, and careful observation. You lift the jar, noticing how the sunlight refracts through the viscous sweetness, casting tiny rainbows on your hands. There is a profound stillness here, as though time itself has slowed to allow you to fully experience this moment. You dip your finger in, tasting the honey, and it is as though every event of the past, every ritual, every flower tended by bees, every laugh and whisper of Dionysus has condensed into this single, golden drop. The flavor is both familiar and mysterious. The earthiness of the vineyard, the delicate floral hints from the wild blossoms, the subtle warmth of sunlight captured within the liquid, and something else, an almost ineffable quality. Like a memory of joy shared long ago, it's a taste that carries history and legend simultaneously, reminding you that even the simplest pleasures can bear the weight of countless stories. As you savor the honey, your mind wanders back over the path that brought you here. You recall the playful way Dionysus first appeared in your imagination, restless and mischievous, and how the initial whispers in the vineyard hinted at secrets hidden within ordinary life. You remember the buzzing messengers, the bees, and the ancient belief that their flight could carry small messages from nature itself. That seemingly mundane hum was, in fact, a channel of communication, and you smile at the thought that such tiny creatures could have been teachers as well as companions. The ancient beekeepers' frustrations, their meticulous records, and the occasional bursts of ingenuity they displayed in guiding bees toward more productive or unusual floral sources come alive in your memory. Even the most arcane and obscure entries in their notebooks, notations about the behavior of bees, strange floral patterns, or seasonal anomalies now feel like pieces of a carefully orchestrated puzzle. Scholars may debate whether the ancients understood the full implications of their work, or if divine influence, through Dionysus, played a larger role. But as you reflect, the details seem almost less important than the patience, attentiveness, and care that permeated every action. Walking slowly toward the end of the vineyard, you notice how the rows seem to gently converge in the distance, guiding your steps as if the land itself is encouraging you to contemplate what you have witnessed. The experience is no longer just about observing events. It's about absorbing the atmosphere, feeling the connection between human, divine, and natural worlds. The rituals, both floral and social, that you traced through the story, the strange yet harmonious interactions between bees and blossoms, the subtle shaping of honey, and the delicate infusion of sweetness into Dionysian festivals have all left an imprint not only on the landscape but on your perception of time, effort, and care. You sense that this is one of the most enduring lessons of the vineyard, that meaningful outcomes, whether in history, life, or simple human endeavors, arise from attentiveness, patience, and an openness to subtle influences. Whether natural, cultural, or even mythical. The wisdom of the past is rarely loud. It whispers in rustling leaves, in the gentle vibrations of bees' wings. In the quiet patience of a hand tending to a vine or a hive, you find a comfortable stone at the edge of the vineyard and sit, letting the warmth of the sun slowly fade into the cooler tones of early evening. The horizon stretches endlessly, the sky painted in muted pastels, and the first evening stars begin to glimmer faintly. It's as if the world itself has exhaled a long, slow sigh, releasing the accumulated energy of the day and leaving only calm, reflective space. In this stillness, you realize the profound subtlety of Dionysus's legacy. It's not merely the festivals, not only the sweetness of honey or wine, nor the stories of playful divine intervention that endure. It is the cultivation of attentiveness, the joy of mindful observation, and the gentle recognition that even the smallest actions can ripple outward, leaving a mark on generations to come. The ancients understood this intuitively, that caring for the land, for animals, for rituals, and for small delights like honey or music, could shape culture and memory in ways that endure far longer than any single human lifetime. Your gaze drifts down to the last drop of honey still glistening in your hand. It is at once simple and infinite, a reminder of the intertwined lives, labors, and whims of humans, bees, and gods. As you swallow, a quiet warmth spreads through you, connecting your senses to all the little stories you have walked through tonight. You feel a deep, unspoken gratitude not just for the sweetness on your tongue, but for the lineage of care and curiosity that has brought it to you. The lesson, subtle yet undeniable, is clear. Life's richness emerges not from force or haste, but from gentle attention, curiosity, and the willingness to be present to the world around you. Dionysus' subtle influence on bees, honey, and human ritual demonstrates that sometimes the most lasting impact is found in small, patient gestures that ripple outward over time. As darkness gathers softly over the vineyard, the sounds of evening crickets, the final whisper of a breeze, the far-off murmur of water blend with your slowing breath. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the last sensory impressions of this journey. The warmth of the sun, the weight of the soil beneath your feet, the faint buzz of bees, the lingering sweetness on your lips. The world feels vast and intimate at once, filled with histories both magical and tangible. You realize that the story you followed is not just about honey, or Dionysus, or even vignettes. It's about the way attentiveness and care can cultivate beauty, sweetness, and connection in every part of life. It's a gentle reminder that whether through observing, creating, or simply being present, we all have the ability to leave a legacy of sweetness for those who come after us. And now, as the final shadows settle and the night draws its soft veil across the land, your senses ease and a calm serenity envelops you. The vineyard, the bees, the honey, and the playful whisper of Dionysus fade gradually, leaving only a tender, lingering warmth in your mind and heart. Take this lesson with you into sleep, that life, like honey, grows sweetest when nurtured patiently, observed closely, and appreciated fully. Let the memory of gentle care, mindful attention, and subtle delight wrap around you like a soft blanket, easing you into rest. Feel your muscles relax, your mind quiet, your breath slow, and allow the sweetness of history, myth, and nature to lull you gently. End of script. Sweet dreams.